Everyone joined in on this, please, not just one person. Right, I'll give you one more minute and then I'm going to make a start because we're already behind. I can see there's 13 people here, so if I don't see 13 people in this game, I'll be very disappointed. It doesn't matter how you do, your answers, your points aren't going to be shown to the rest of to everyone else, to the rest of the group. So don't worry about panicking. I just want to see you have a go to make the session a bit more interactive today and a bit more fun. If you can't join, that's fine. Let me know. I'll still put the answers up. So if you can't join the actual Kahoot, I'll still show you the quiz happen live in person, and you can write the answers in the chat if that's a problem. Yeah, it's fine if you can't join, if there's some technical issue or whatever. I'll keep track of your answers in the chat because only I can see your answers. So put multiple choice, whichever you think. Right, I'm going to start. Is everyone joined that wants to join? I know it's not many of you. I'm a little disappointed by the spread, by the turnout. Okay, right. I got to make a start. So, okay, right. If you're not actually in the Kahoot game, just put your answers in the chats for now. Okay, let's make a start. So this is based on the keywords I gave you last week. Put the answers in the chat if you're not in this game. Okay, we need a word that means excessive confidence or boldness or audacity. What word was this? Oh, some of you have not been revising. It is temerity rather, temerity. It means to be audacious or to do something with excessive confidence. Okay. Right, second question. Fill in the blank. She was something with fear when she saw the spider. I know some of you got that last question right in the chat. Well done. I can see some of you already getting it right in the chat. It is paralyzed. So if you are paralyzed, you cannot move. Okay, next question. Welcome to those who have just joined. So which word means showing great care and perseverance from last week? I'm going to do another one of these next week, so be here on time to join the game, please. If you do something assiduously, you do something with great care. Okay. Which word means to have a private or secret meeting? I can see people getting it right in the chat. Some wrong answers, some right. The code is 104625 if you still want to join. It is conclave. Yep, that is a note. You can still join if you haven't already. It's 104625 is the code. Okay, the teacher was so something that all the students paid attention. I've accidentally written the answer in this one. I've been stupid. Hopefully they should be 100% on this one. Take advantage of my errors. That you only have yourselves to blame for this one. Okay. Okay, which me word means careless or without thinking about danger? So if I was to do something this way, I would do so without caring about consequences. It is reckless. If anyone still wants to join, the pin is 104625. Okay. Which word means great surprise or amazement? It is. I was meant to write astonishment. You can very clearly see that I wrote these when I was very tired. Okay. Fill in the blank. She was something reader, finished 3 books in a week. Correct answer is voracious. If you do something voraciously, you do it because you want to, very hungry. Okay, fill in the blank. He showed great something by speaking up to the strict teacher. It is temerity. So if you do something with temerity, you do it with audacity, with confidence. Okay, halfway through, her worried something showed that something was wrong. And I've given you a little clue with a picture here. It is countenance. So when we say someone's countenance, it means their face or their facial expression. Okay. He could hear the voices, but they spoke so something that he could not understand them. Nice. We're getting better at these. It is indistinctly. So if something is indistinct, it's not clear. Okay. The crowd gasped in something when the magician vanished. It's not loading my picture. Nice. Good. We're getting good at these. Astonishment is the correct answer. See if anybody's in the row. Nice. Okay. Which word means a person's face or facial expression? It is countenance. So some people put animation. So animation is when it's animated, it's more of a verb, means lots of energy, whereas countenance is a noun, specifically relating to someone's face. Okay, 14. Driving at high speed in the rain is extremely blank. Oh, we've got a little bit of a split on the bottom three on this one. It is reckless. If you do something recklessly, you do it without caring about the consequences. Okay, almost there. The leaders held a secret something to discuss the treaty. Which one was to do with a meeting? And I've specifically put a picture of the Pope on here, or rather a sculpture, a statue of the Pope, because I hoped it would give you a clue. It is conclave. Good, we're learning. Okay. He worked blank on his sculpture until it was perfect. So it is assiduously. He worked with great care on his sculpture. Ooh, close in the top two. Okay, one double points round. Which word means having a huge appetite or being very eager? Nice, it is voracious. Okay, which word means full of life or excitement or to be lively? Let's see what people are getting in the chat. Few right answers, nice. It is to be animated. Think about your favorite cartoon films. They're animations because they're full of life. A lot of people put astonished. Astonished is to be surprised, to be shocked, whereas animated is full of life. Closing on that second, on that first spot. Okay, two questions left. Which word means unable to move or act or to be immobilized? It is to be paralyzed. Okay, last and final question. Which word means not clear or well defined? A few right answers in the chat. It is indistinct. People wrote assiduous, which means to do something with care. Nice, well done, guys. I think the general consensus is that one, yeah, people did relatively well. A few wrong answers shows me you've maybe not been through the words that I gave you, but this is definitely something to brush up on because I'm going to try and do some sort of fun interactive thing at the start of each session from now on. Well done to everyone who participated, and thank you for participating. Okay, right. On to what we're going to do today. As always, here's a list of definitions of those keywords in case you didn't get them from last week. Now, last week we began to look at this idea of making inferences. And so I'm going to give you another little 2-minute activity, and I want some answers in the chat. I want today to be very interactive. I want people writing answers at me because I don't just want it to be me talking at you for an hour. Last week, we looked at inferences. What kind of things could you pick out from this image? What about this image tells you something about what's going on? Maybe who owns it? What do you think they do for a job? What's happened to make it look this way? What personality traits might this person have? I don't just want answers, I want reasons why. Put your answers in the chat and I'll read a few out. It's okay if you weren't here last week. I started to look at inferences and we'll go through what that is again in a second as a reminder. But as a quick starting activity, this is a good example of making inferences. Any ideas? A person in an office? What kind of person? What kind of office? Can you be more specific? Who do you think owns this office and what might tell you that about this picture? They might be an author because there's a lot of books. Possibly, I like that. Someone who's really keen to learn, yes, that might be another reason that somebody has lots of books. What about these open art sketches down here? The ruler that you can see down here. A historian. The stack of books are a bit old and has an ancient picture, so possibly some sort of architect or historian. A messy person who is busy or has a bad schedule, possibly a librarian, possibly an author and a good student, a mailman. It could be a writer. I like all of these ideas. So I wanted you to think about this because this is another good example of inferences. So when we make an inference, we're making an educated guess about what is going on based on the image. So a lot of you picked out here these stack of books. Hopefully, they should tell you something about who might own this office, possibly an academic, possibly an artist, possibly a historian, looking at these pictures back here. Clearly someone who's very messy. But it was clear to you, I should hope, that it's not someone whose office has been broken into. And I think there are a few small details that would hopefully tell you that it's not disorganized chaos, but rather an organized one. There's no open drawers, there's nothing stolen. So hopefully you should know that it's someone who's maybe a bit more creative. So then, as a quick reference back to last week, what actually is an inference? Well, an inference is a conclusion or an idea that we can work out as the reader from clues in the text, rather than it being directly told to you. And I wanted to bring up this idea of inferences because when you get to GCSE, the very first question on your English language exam will be an inference question. And so you'll be expected to pick things out of a text. And even in question 4, inferences come into that as well. So it's a very useful skill that if you manage earlier on, it will really help you down the line. So you can use evidence from a text and your own knowledge to figure something out. Think of it as reading between the lines. Because English is all about forming opinions. You know, there's no one correct right or wrong answer. And so we have to sort of use evidence to put together as full a picture as we possibly can. Now, we also briefly covered subtext, which is slightly different to inferences in the sense that it's the hidden meaning beneath the words. So it's more, rather than it being, so inferences are less what a character says, whereas subtext is what a character says, and it's what the text shows. So why something like subtext matters? Well, it's reading between the lines. It's showing what a character might think without directly telling you what they think or feel, which is so important for engaging a reader, because what reader wants to read a story where you're told directly everything? That would be so boring and you won't want to read the rest of the book. So it helps to keep the reader engaged by having to work things out. But it also helps the reader to understand motives, tension, relationships, beyond directly what is told is in the words, or to us in the words, I should say. And it makes reading and drama richer and more interesting. Now, how can we spot something like subtext? Well, it's not what is said, but it's how it is said. So the tone of the words, the dialogue, the pauses, the body language, the description in the text. Notice what is left out. What the character doesn't say can be just as important as what they say. Think about context, setting, relationship, situation. Those of you who are into drama might have heard the term given circumstances before. And this is a very similar concept to what we're dealing with now. It just means, what do you know about the situation? What do you know about the setting? What do you know about the relationships, the situation, the person's life? They're the contextual clues that will give you an idea about how to understand what is going on. So a good example is someone might say to you, I'm fine, but do they really mean that they're fine? Well, it depends how they say it. Maybe the subtext might be that they're actually quite upset, angry, or scared, but they're just hiding it. So the subtext there is between the lines. You know, you haven't been told that they're upset, but you could possibly work it out by how someone says it. Okay. So linking to the exam that I mentioned, English language paper 1, you're going to be asked what are called comprehension questions. And all that means is these are questions about a text. They're there to check if you've understood what you've actually read. And I'm going to go through some today. I'm going to go through some today. And I'm going to get you to give me the answers in the chat. I want it to be a bit more interactive than last week. But quickly, sorry, let me just read the chat. Okay, right. So there are 5 different types of comprehension questions you might come across. First, our literal questions. These are questions that will ask you something directly from the text. So basically active recall. It will ask you, for example, check if students can find and recall facts directly stated. So you might read a book where the main character is called Pip, and it will ask you, where did Pip meet, or where was Pip when they met the convict? So they'll be looking for factual pieces of information. And question 1 of your English language exam will be a literal comprehension question. So I'm going to get you to do some today for me. Second are our inference questions, the ones where you're asked to read between the lines, where you need to work something out that isn't directly stated. So, for example, rather than where was Pip, it might be what does Pip's reaction to the convict tell us about his feelings? Something that you're not directly told, but you can work out. You might be asked a vocabulary question. We're not going to do any of these today because I've already given you new words, but these might include working out what a word means from the context of a sentence. And we've looked at quite a few of these last year. Interpretation or analytical questions. So these are ones that ask for interpretation of possibly themes, character motives, or symbols. So for example, why might Dickens describe Scrooge in such a negative way or in negative terms at the beginning? So you've got to kind of work out the writer's intention for doing something. And that's a lot of what English language is about. Okay, opinion and personal response questions. This is where we invite you to give us your opinions about a certain topic or about the story. So, for example, do you sympathize with the monster in Frankenstein? And in your English language exam, if you're doing AQA or even Edexcel, this will be a large portion of the marks. Normally an AQA is a 20-mark question, which is a quarter of your paper 1 marks, will be an opinion question. It will be something along the lines of, to what extent do you agree with this statement? And then you've got to argue for and against. So we're not going to do many of those today because they're a longer mark question. I'm going to focus more on the 1, 2, and 4. Okay. So the text, the next 20 minutes that we're going to work through together is a book called Animal Farm. If you've not read it, it's a really wonderful book. It's only 70, 75 pages or so. I would recommend a read. It is on the Key Stage 3 syllabus. And a bit of context about this book before we read the extract is it was written in 1945 and what we call an allegory. If you don't know what an allegory means, this is a story with a hidden meaning behind. So, for example, on the surface, this book appears to be about a group of farm animals who overthrow their farmer. But what it's really about, what the deeper message is it's about power, control, and corruption in human society. But the main message of this book is how good intentions can easily be twisted into injustice and dictatorship. So really, it's a critique on communism. But you don't need to know that deep about it. And a really famous quote from this book is, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. So that should give you a vibe of what this extract is going to be about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through this. And as I'm reading through this, I want you to start picking up the story, picking up some maybe deeper textual information, anything that you think might be important for your understanding of the text. Okay, so if he made a good recovery, the boxer might expect to live another 3 years, and he looked forward to the peaceful days that he would spend in the corner of the big pasture. It would be the first time that he had leisure to study and improve his mind. He intended, he said, to devote the rest of his life to learning the remaining 22 letters of the alphabet. However, Benjamin and Clover could only be with Boxer after working hours, and it was in the middle of the day when the van came to take him away. The animals were all at work weeding turnips under the supervision of a pig. when they were astonished to see Benjamin come galloping from the direction of the farm buildings, braying at the top of his voice. It was the first time that they had ever seen Benjamin excited. Indeed, it was the first time that anyone had ever seen him gallop. Quick, quick, he shouted, come at once. They're taking Boxer away. Without waiting for orders from the pigs, the animals broke off and raced back to the farm buildings. Sure enough, there in the yard was a large closed van, drawn by two horses with lettering on the side and a sly-looking man in a low-crowned bowler hat sitting on the driver's seat. And Boxer's stall was empty. The animals crowded round the van. Goodbye, Boxer, they chorused. Goodbye. Fools, fools, shouted Benjamin, prancing round them and stamping the earth with his small hooves. Fools, do you not see what is written on the side of the van? That gave the animals pause, and there was a hush. Muriel began to spell out the words, but Benjamin pushed her aside, and in the midst of a deadly silence, he read, Alfred Simmons, horse slaughterer and glue boiler, Willingdon. Dealer in hides and bone meal, kennels supplied. Do you not understand what that means? They're taking Boxer to the knackers. A cry of horror burst from all the animals. At this moment, the man on the box whipped up his horses, and the van moved out the yard with a small trot. All the animals followed, crying out at the tops of their voices. Clover forced her way to the front. The van began to gather speed. Clover tried to stir her stout limbs to a gallop and achieved a canter. Boxer, she cried. Boxer, Boxer, Boxer. And just at this moment, as though he had heard the uproar outside, Boxer's face with the white stripe down his nose appeared at the small window at the back of the van. Boxer, cried Clover in a terrible voice. Boxer, get out quickly, they're taking you to your death. All the animals took up the cry of get out, Boxer, get out, but the van was already gathering speed and drawing away from them. It was uncertain whether Boxer had understood what Clover had said, but a moment later his face disappeared from the window and there was a sound of tremendous drumming of hooves inside the van. He was trying to kick his way out. The time had been when a few kicks from Boxer's hooves would have smashed the van to matchwood. But alas, his strength had left him, and in a few moments the sound of drumming hooves grew fainter and died away. In desperation, the animals began appealing to the two horses, which drew the van to stop. Comrades, comrades, they shouted, don't take your own brother to his death. But the stupid brutes, too ignorant to realize what was happening, merely set back their ears and quickened their pace. Boxer's face did not reappear at the window. Too late, someone thought of racing ahead and shutting the 5-barred gate. But in another moment, the van was through it and rapidly disappearing down the road. Boxer was never seen again. Okay, right. So this is the short extract that we're going to be dealing with today. So first question is first. This is a question that will be very similar to the one that you get on your paper 1 exam, and it will normally be 4 marks. 1 mark for each correct answer. So I'm going to give you a minute or so to give me some answers to this question in the chat, and then we will go through it together. But I'm hoping it should be pretty self-explanatory. So the Key Stage 3 session ends at 8, and then we're doing a Key Stage 4 GCSE session from 8 till 9. It is a very depressing extract, it's a very depressing story, but it's a great story nonetheless. Cool, right, some answers coming in. Name 4 things we know. A tip, look for factual statements from this paragraph here. Correct, Boxer is a horse would be a correct statement that we do know from this text. Another one, he might have been ill, is a correct factual piece of information. Anything else? He's improving his mind. Yes, is a correct factual piece of information. One more and we get 4 marks out of 4 for this question. He was injured. Yes. He was owned. Yes, would be a good answer. So yeah, this kind of question should be pretty self-explanatory. There's lots of things you can pick out. I've given 6 examples, but there are more. So for example, anything along the lines of he's recovering or ill or injured, he might expect to live another 3 years. He looked forward to spending time in the big pasture, or that he loved the pasture. It would be the first time he had leisure to study. He hadn't had time to improve his mind recently, and he intended to devote the rest of his life to learning the remaining 22 letters of the alphabet. Any of those would be acceptable answers. So I'm hoping this question is pretty easy because it's just picking things out. Now, I'm going to give you another 2 minutes to have a think about these and give you some answers in the chat, and then we'll discuss these as well. But these are only literal questions. So again, we're looking for factual bits of information. So firstly, who was it that came galloping from the stables or the farmhouses? Why were the animals astonished? And why was Benjamin annoyed at the other animals? Factual bits of information, please, that we know. So I've already received a correct answer from number 2. Who was it that came galloping to the stables or from the stables? It was Benjamin. They saw Benjamin come galloping from the direction of the farm buildings. So number 2 is Benjamin. What about number 3? Why were the animals astonished? Factual bits of information, please. Look sort of down here if you're struggling for an answer. Think about their reception of Benjamin. It says it was the first time that they had ever seen Benjamin excited. So why were they astonished? Because this was not a natural occurrence. So they knew something must have been wrong from the fact that they saw Benjamin galloping for the first time in a long time. What about number 4? Why was Benjamin annoyed at the other animals? They get astonished from Benjamin first, but you could argue the van later on. So why was Benjamin annoyed at the other animals? I'd look at this bit down here. Why does he call them fools? So I got a correct answer. They call him fools, suggesting that Benjamin is annoyed because they do not read the side of the van, which we know later is to be a bad thing. So he gets annoyed at them because they mistook the situation because they did not read the side of the van. Okay. So I hope those should be pretty easy questions. They're just picking out factual bits of information. We'll do 3 more and then we'll move on to some inference questions. So thinking about this extract here. First off, what words were written on the side of the van? Factual bits of information, please. And then where is the man taking Boxer? And what sound did the animals hear from inside the van as Boxer was trying to escape? Yep, I'm getting some more correct answers from number 4. They didn't know Boxer was getting killed is correct. What about number 5, 6, and 7? If you're another minute for this. Hopefully number 5 should be pretty self-explanatory. We're looking for factual bits in line 23 to 24. So I said the Key Stage 3 session ends at 8. If you want to stay for the GCSE one, that ends at 9. So, first one, what is written on the van? Alfred Simmons, horse slaughterer and glue boiler Willingdon, dealer in hides and bone meal, kennel supplied. Where was the man taking Boxer? It tells us that they are taking him to the knackers. Does anyone know what that means? Yes, they're taking him to the slaughterhouse. And then number 7, what sound did the animals hear from inside the van as they tried to escape? They heard the drumming of hooves, the tremendous drumming of hooves, I should say, from line 38 to 39. Okay. And there they are in the text, highlighted where you need to look. Okay, right, inference questions then. So this is where we need to start doing one extra step and begin to read between the lines to work out the pieces of information. So again, answer in the chat, please. Can I explain what slaughter means? It means to kill. So if I slaughtered something, I would kill it violently. which is not a very nice thing. It's a very depressing thing for this story to be about, really. Okay, why is it significant that Benjamin was excited for the first time? So rather than just looking for factual bits of information, you've got to work it out from what is given to you in the text. Then, who do you think are the leaders of the farm and why? What can we infer about the pigs from the fact they did not help to stop the van? Any ideas? You are allowed to stay for the GCSE ones if you think it would be helpful. We're going through Act 3, Scene 4 of Macbeth today. Welcome to you who are new, by the way. I know there was a lot of new people last week. So, someone said, what is the significance that Benjamin was excited? Because he's getting mad. But why? Why is that significant? Why is it important? Who do you think are the leaders of the farm? Somebody said Benjamin and Clover. I would maybe disagree. I think look at this part here. There's something that you've overlooked. What were the animals doing when Benjamin came galloping by? So the correct answer someone has given me in the chat is the pigs. The pigs are the rulers of the farm. And the way that I would work it out is by looking at what the horses were doing before, so what the animals were doing before the horses came in. They were all at work weeding turnips under the supervision of a pig. So the fact that they were under supervision from a pig suggests that maybe the pigs are the leaders of this farm. Okay, what about number 8 then? Why is it significant? I think it's significant. And then what can we infer about the pigs from the fact they did not help stop the van? I'll give you 30 more seconds and I'll give you some answers for these. I've not seen any answers for number 10 yet in the chat. The pigs don't really care about anything but themselves and their needs. Yes, that is a correct answer. So, why is it significant that Benjamin was excited? Well, it shows how serious the situation is. We know from the text that he's normally very calm. So the fact that he's riled up shows that there must be something of vital importance for the group happening. Who do you think are the leaders? Well, it's the pigs. They are supervising work. The animals are supposed to wait for orders from the pigs. It says without waiting for orders from the pigs down here. Okay, and then what can we infer about the pigs from the fact they did not help to stop the van? Possibly that they had something to do with Boxer's death. That they are possibly corrupt and deceitful. I mean, they do lead the farm. They make the other animals work and they give the other animals orders. That suggests that they're corrupt. Okay. So only the pigs give orders, correct? Okay. Okay, from the last little bit of the text then, 2 more. Why are the horses described as stupid brutes, do you think, by the writer? And what can we infer about Boxer's physical state when he tries to kick his way out? So again, this is requiring a little bit of extra thinking rather than just factual bits of information. Possibly Boxer did die in the van. That's not confirmed, but that is a possibility. Why do you think the horses are described as stupid brutes, the ones that are pulling the van away? It says, don't take your own brother to his death, but the stupid brutes, too ignorant to realize what was happening, merely set back their ears and quickened their pace. Give you 30 more seconds. Any more answers? For number 12, think about this top bit. His strength had left him. What does that tell us about his strength, his physical state? Okay. Right, for number 11, I put because the horses don't understand that they are helping to take Boxer to his death. The fact that they are described as ignorant, they don't realize what is happening. And then he is too weak. It tells us that his strength had left him, that his hooves, the sound of his drumming hooves grew fainter and died away. So we know that he must be getting weak. Okay, The next set of questions you might get are analytical questions. So these involve picking things out of a text. So when we say analyzing language, it's about unpicking the words and the structure of the text to see, what I've put, smaller, simpler elements. So when we think about analyzing a text, and you'll do this more in GCSE, things that you could pick out are words. So the different types of words that are used, the sentence types that are used, the order of the paragraphs, the order of the story, and then any sort of literary techniques. So our metaphors, our similes, symbolism, imagery, repetition, onomatopoeia, all of that. And you can also look at the text as a whole. So whether that's the characters, so from their appearance, their objectives, their motivations, the dialogue, to themes that might encompass the whole novel, or the plot, what happens and when. So very quickly, for the last 10 minutes, let's have a quick look at some analytical questions, and I'll see what you get for these. So firstly, why does Orwell repeat the animal's cries of the three boxers, do you think? What can we tell about the animals that run to the van? So for these kind of questions, you've got to think that even bit deeper and start to pick apart the text. And then what does the description of Boxer's last moments show you about the wider themes of power and corruption, Animal Farm? We'll come back to this one, focus on 13 and 14 for a second. So someone's put for 13, desperation, absolutely. Because they're absolutely desperate. I think desperation is such a good word to pick out for this, because it's not just a want. Desperation implies a need, an absolute desire. So I love that you chose the word desperation, because I think that's exactly correct. Someone said because he's scared for him that he'll get slaughtered. Absolutely, there's fear in there. So if we're really picking this answer apart, it's not just desperation, it's fear. What about what we can tell of animals that run to the van? What kind of personality traits might they have, for example? Someone said for 13, it shows that the animals are desperate to get Boxer out of the van. Absolutely, they are. They're trying to save him. So when I say the word theme, what I mean is something that covers or spans the entire text. So for example, you'll do Macbeth at GCSE. And one theme that keeps appearing throughout Macbeth is deception. And the reason it's a theme is because it keeps cropping up throughout the play. So it's an idea or a concept that keeps reoccurring throughout an entire story. So yes, somebody said for number 14 that they are loyal. That's absolutely right to what I put. I said it shows their panic, love, and desperation, and that they are loyal. Okay, but what I really want to focus on is question 15. What does the description of Boxer's last moments show you about the wider themes of power and corruption in Animal Farm? So I've given you some ideas that I thought would be helpful to build on. What about the abuse of power? Does the text in any way link or show you that? What about corruption of the way people think, of ideals, and the manipulation, deception? If I go back and take you back to the extract that I am talking about, is there anything in here that would suggest anything about power and corruption, do you think? If we're thinking about these themes to the linking to the wider context of what the book is about, which is about a critique on communism and human society. So someone said the pigs might be the strongest and it's hard to dethrone them. Absolutely it is. The pigs didn't come to help, which suggests they arranged Boxer's death. Possibly, yes. I think absolutely. So I put, these are some along the lines of some of the things you could have talked about. So in terms of the book, you might find an abuse of power. So when we talk about power, it doesn't necessarily have to be a positive thing. Often power is portrayed as quite a dangerous, violent force in texts. Look at Macbeth, for example. Power is such a dangerous thing to possess. And same here. The pigs hold the authority of this farm. They use their power not for good, but to manipulate and control the other animals. Boxer is the strongest and most loyal worker and trusts the leadership completely. His labor has built the farm's wealth and stability, yet when he is injured, the pigs choose to exploit him rather than help him. They let all the other animals chase after the van, but the pigs do nothing. They don't care about Boxer the horse. Which shows that, I guess, linking to human society, it's often a critique of the world that we live in, really, is that big business owners who are making millions don't necessarily care about the singular workers. Often workers are described as replaceable. And it's the same here. The horse, Boxer, got the farm a lot of money, but the pigs were very easy to discard him away. So by sending him to the knacker or the slaughterhouse, the pigs demonstrates how those in power can exploit the vulnerable for personal gain, showing a stark misuse of authority. Okay, what about the corruption of ideals? Well, in the book, there's a thing called animalism, and that just is the belief that all animals are equal. So this belief promised equality, except Boxer embodies the ideal of hard work and loyalty to these principles. His betrayal highlights the corruption of the revolution's original ideals. Yet the leadership, instead of protecting the workers who built the farm, prioritizes profit and comfort, showing that the revolution goals have been completely subverted. And then looking to manipulation and deception. The cart that takes Boxer away is labeled as a vehicle to the hospital, but in reality, it goes to the slaughterhouse. This deception mirrors the broader theme of how corrupt leaders manipulate truth to maintain power, and they do so by keeping you in a state of fear. So Boxer's blind trust and the pig's manipulation illustrate the dangers of absolute power when unchecked. Okay, so finally then, final question that we'll go through together, and I'll give you some work to do at home. How does Orwell create tension in this extract? This is something that if you're doing Edexcel, you will come across a question like this in your exam. It might not be tension, it might be suspense, it might be mystery, but for my example, I've gone with how does Orwell create tension in this extract? So, because we don't have long left, because we started late, I'm just going to give you some answers rather than asking you in the chat. But one thing that you might think about is how this extract opens. And it opens very hopefully, in the comprehension questions that we did, you were able to tell me things about Boxer, that he loved the big pasture, that he was recovering, that he was expected to live another 3 years, that he wanted to learn the 22 letters of the alphabet. Except, I hope you notice there's a very stark contrast between this introductory paragraph and this next longer paragraph. Why do you think the writer has chosen to have a very big contrast between this very hopeful introduction and a very depressing, tension-filled second paragraph? Why do you think that's been done? Any ideas in the chat? Why do you think there's been a big change between this first paragraph and the second? Something that's gone it started off very calm and then got very high stakes very quickly. Now, I think this creates tension. Sorry, let me see. It makes it more interesting. Absolutely, it does. It does make it more interesting. It also creates tension because people don't know what's coming next. Imagine if I was telling you a story verbally and I suddenly started to switch it up and I was like, oh, and this happened. Imagine you were on a roller coaster and you were going up and you're accelerating up the slope. And then you got to the top and then accelerates and starts going down. That's kind of what's happening here with this story. The first paragraph is that kind of anticipation feeling as you go up the roller coaster. You hit the top and then you start accelerating. I hope that would make you feel some sort of thrill. And that's exactly how you're supposed to feel here. You're supposed to feel sort of thrown off, disjointed. You're not meant to know what's happening. And it kind of puts you in the place of the story. Now, thinking about the second paragraph, I'm going to quickly speed through these and I'll give you some homework. This second paragraph is very fast-paced compared to this introductory one. And we know that through the exclamatory dialogue, the repeated dialogue, the rapid verbs, galloping, braying, raced. All of these things are supposed to create tension because they're keeping the reader on their feet. They're keeping the reader in a state of not knowing so that you're involved and invested in a part of the story. You're supposed to feel how the characters feel. So if they're feeling very disjointed and very confused, you're supposed to feel the same. That's what makes it interesting. And then finally, on the second piece of this extract, we get the repetition of this sort of triplet of the boxer. This, as you can see, exclamatory in the phrasing. So this shows how depressing the situation is. The drumming of hooves. We get this metaphor relating hooves to the instrument of the drum. And then we can see that it ends where the horse is feeling weak. And so we are supposed to feel a loss of hope. Sorry that I've kind of whizzed through that. I'm going to need to move on to GCSE. So from next week, I am hoping to start on time and I'm going to do another Kahoot quiz to start. So if you're not here on time, you will not be involved in the quiz. So please arrive on time just before 7 if you can. Now, as always, I've left some opinion questions for your homework. Those of you that have been sending me homework, thank you very much. Those of you who haven't, that's your loss. But if you want, we've now officially got a place where you can send the homework. Please email anything to this email address and it will get to me directly. Because before we didn't have an email for me, but now we do. So this is how you contact me, please, if you have anything to send me before next week. Will this homework be submitted on the link? I don't know what you mean by that. If you could do it in a Google Doc or a Microsoft Word document and send it to me to this email or send it as a PDF, however you want to send it, just to this email. I've been told to tell you not the WhatsApp, please, because if it gets sent to the WhatsApp, it will not be sent to me. So please send it to the email. Correct. That is the email. Thank you for putting it in the chat. Okay, those of you who want to stay for the GCSE, please stick around. You're very welcome to stay. We're going to be not finishing, but continuing our work on Macbeth in just a moment. I'm going to leave this homework on just while I get a new drink. Okay, so if you're Key Stage 3, we're done for the Key Stage 3 session. If you want to stay around for the GCSE one, please do. Everyone that's come for GCSE, welcome. Let's continue our work on Macbeth. We'll skip the starter because we've got a lot to get through today. So we're finally back. Welcome to everyone who is new to this journey. Unfortunately, you're jumping in halfway through what we started. But hopefully, those of you who are in year 10, year 11, you'll have already started Macbeth, and so you won't be too out of the blue, out of the, yeah. So, where we left off, we were about to begin Act 3, Scene 4, and I left it on purpose because this is a very pivotal scene to the play. And I'm going to focus most of today on this scene because it is vital to the importance of the rest of the play. So, as a quick summary, at a royal banquet, Macbeth is haunted by Banquo's ghost, visible only to him. His erratic behavior alarms the guests, and Lady Macbeth dismisses them to restore order. This scene highlights Macbeth's unraveling sanity and guilt, so it's very important. Okay, a little fanfare. We're here, we've made it. We've made it to the climax of the play. Everything before this was building up to the climax, but this is it. This is the pivotal moment where things start to go wrong. It's just so important because this, contextually, is Macbeth's peripeteia. This is the point at which there is no return. Everything after this point, his fate is sealed. There's no forgiveness, there's no going back, there's no undoing what he's done. He must fall. His fate is sealed and absolute. So contextually, as a tragic hero, this is our key word, our peripeteia. It's a Greek word meaning the point of no return, the reversal of fortune. So, very important scene. And as always, here's some key quotes. Take a picture, do whatever you need to do. Have them, you're welcome. And now this is recorded, so I'm going to skip past them, but please go back if you need them. So, where do we begin? Well, at the start of the scene, Macbeth welcomes his guests, and his guests are all of the noble people of the kingdom. So they're people who are very high ranking. And he says, at first and last, the hearty welcome. Ourself will mingle with society and play the humble host. And what he means by that is whether you are high ranking or low ranking, I welcome all of you into my chambers, and I will speak to all of you regardless of what status you are. And that's important because that shows us Macbeth's deceptive side. If you remember earlier in Act 3, his previous murder of Duncan had come under suspicion. And so it's important now that he plays face, that he plays the humble host, that he appeals to his nobles. This line reflects his duplicitous nature, because on the surface, he's acting as this warm and generous king. And we know that through the sort of soft fricative consonants. You get this 3H all in a row, the hearty, humble host. The soft sounds of the H create a very inviting tone. Except that contrasts quite heavily to this idea of playing, this verb of the play, which suggests actually he's being false. So although he's trying to play the host, although he's trying to be the host rather, there is a deeper underscored motive to his actions. So this creates a sense of dramatic irony as the audience know that his words are hollow. He doesn't really mean what he's saying. He's not really the nice host. He's just trying to draw them in and get them on his side. So this moment also reveals Macbeth's insecurity as he's false, as he feels the need to prove himself to society. This is kind of where his guilt comes into play, because right now he's feeling a little guilty about killing Duncan and becoming king by illegitimate means. And so he kind of feels the need to try and play up to his duties. He's trying to be nice purposefully to the nobles so that he feels justified in being king. So there's multiple motives for him trying to play the gracious host. Except Banquo has been murdered. Bleons escapes. And this is key to the plot. So just to remind you, Banquo was Macbeth's best friend. Bleons was Banquo's son. Banquo was meant to be next to inherit, or was maybe up for inheriting the throne. So Macbeth has had him murdered, and he tried to have Fleance murdered as well, but Fleance managed to get away. Now, we know that Banquo is dead, quite simply because he asks the murderer that he asked to do it. He says, "There is blood upon thy face. 'Tis better thee without than he within. Is he dispatched?" Now, what he's saying there is, there's blood on your face. You might want to go clear it. But it is better than being inside Banquo's body. Is he actually murdered? And so the murderer says, yes, his throat is cut. So we know that Banquo is dead because it's confirmed by the murderer who did it. Except I've left a little note of importance on the bottom of this slide. It's key to note that this conversation is happening in public. It's happening in front of all of the nobles that have come into his castle. So that tells us something about Macbeth. Earlier in the play, all of his plotting was done in private. It was done in his bedroom chambers, where there was no one else around. But now, he's having a conversation about murder in front of all of the nobles of the kingdom. That's a very reckless move, wouldn't you agree? If that doesn't show how paranoid he is, I don't know what does. That is a clear point of his peripeteia. His kingship is becoming very unstable to the point where he's not going to be able to return from his actions. Okay. Now, he finds out from the murderer that Fleance has escaped. And his response to that is, "There the grown serpent lies. The worm that's fled hath nature that in time will venom breed." But what he means by that is Banquo is dead, but Fleance has escaped. He won't prove to be a problem yet, but he will grow up to be very dangerous. And so he's planning ahead already. He says that Fleance is only a kid right now, so he's not going to be a huge threat to the throne. But in a few years' time, when he grows into an adult, he's going to be a very dangerous person. So let's start picking out some AO2 of this, some language analysis. First thing to notice is you've got these animalistic metaphors to refer to Banquo and Fleance. He calls them the grown serpent and the worm. Now, that's a very dehumanizing thing to call somebody, which shows that he views them as a threat, possibly something of little value. You know, he's presenting them as almost vicious predators, the grown serpent, showing how disconnected he is, or he has become from his own morality and guilt. Possibly being king feels like life or death to him. He's constantly got threats at every door. And so he's going to feel a little bit paranoid and insecure. The tone here is one of triumph. He believes he is a hero for inheriting, well, not inheriting, but for gaining the crown. And so he almost sees Banquo as like this big, fanciful threat. And so he's quite proud of taking down the serpent. You also get this very natural and biblical imagery in the nature that in time will venom breed. And what that suggests is Fleance's danger is inherent. At the end of the day, the reason that he's dangerous is because he can inherit the throne. He has a claim to the throne. And so him being alive is a threat to Macbeth. And so he refers to the biblical snake in the Garden of Eden, who we know was a very deceptive and manipulative figure in the Bible. So this shows that Macbeth is paranoid because he's constantly looking ahead to new threats. He sees Fleance as being this snake, this possible threat that could manipulate and mislead him. And so we're beginning to see the consequences of his actions. The idea of this venom as well, the particular use of the word, the noun venom, it becomes a symbol of danger. You know, when we think of venom, it's something that could possibly kill you. So we associate it with violence. And so it becomes a symbol of danger and betrayal and revenge. You know, it's something that can inflict pain on someone. And so this is almost foreshadowing Macbeth's downfall because he realizes that Fleance is not yet a threat because he's a child, but he will become one when he gets older. And so he is still scared of Fleance, which is kind of ironic considering he's a child. But that's the way it is. Now, ironically, Venom is associated with evil. So this paints Fleon as a villain, yet it is actually Macbeth who's succumbed to evil. So it's weird that he's almost calling Fleance this venomous beast because he's the one that's murdered everyone. So it's really ironic in that sense. Okay, thinking about the context then. How can we link this to the greater understanding of the play on a wider level? Well, it shows us Macbeth as a tragic hero. We know this is his point of peripeteia. This is his point where there is no return. He cannot come back from these actions. And so this shows us how far he is falling from grace. He began the play very noble, very likable, and is now falling to a point of being hated. And so he's losing all sense of morality and order. He's experiencing agonizing paranoia due to his hamartia of ambition. If we think back, hamartia means tragic flaw. So by trying to kill Fleance to secure his position, he has caused himself to fall even further. The fact that he used them as sort of dehumanized predators shows how much he has changed since we first met him in Act 1. He is dissociated from any sense of self and humanity. He feels like a threat and will do anything to stop that threat, even though it's leading to his downfall. Also, the Holinshed Chronicles. Shakespeare purposefully alters the character of Macbeth. He purposefully gives him more humanistic qualities, and he causes him to fall within a much faster space of time, or much shorter space of time. And the reason that is because it emphasizes the moral message of this play, that don't play with fire because you're going to get burnt, in the same sense of don't tempt fate, don't break your place in the great chain of being, otherwise you're gonna suffer for it. The idea of punishment and the great chain of being. Well, think back to our context. The great chain of being is an idea that everyone has their place in society, and anyone who tries to overstep that place is gonna be punished cosmically by the gods. And so Macbeth continues to overstep his place in the hierarchy of life and is clearly being punished for it. These are the consequences of him killing Duncan and of Banquo. He's experiencing those consequences right now. And then also fate versus free will. The fact that the more Macbeth tries to deny his fate, the more he wills it into existence and allows it to come true. He wanted to kill Fleance in order to refute the prophecy given by the witches, but Fleance ended up escaping and now is still destined to become the king. So is that weighing up a whose fault is it? Is it fate or is it Macbeth's own free will? Okay, quick look at the chat before we move on. So Inspector Calls we'll be doing in 2 or 3 weeks from now. I'm going to finish Macbeth. So when I say he falls from grace, what I mean is he starts off from a place of being very likable. That's all grace means. Very respectable, very well liked. And he falls to a place of not necessarily just dislike, but also morally becomes very questionable. So if everyone knows he killed Banquo, but they don't know he killed Banquo. Yes, he has this conversation in public, but they don't know that he killed Banquo. So this is also his response to him killing Banquo. I had else been perfect, whole as the marble, bounded as the rock, as broad and general as the casing air. But now I am cabined, cribbed, confined, bound into saucy doubts and fears. And what he really means here is he's saying how shaken he is the fact that Fleance escaped. He's actually a little bit nervous that Fleance escaped. So, can we pick anything language-wise out of this quote? Well, first things first, I would pick this triplet out here. The whole as marble, founded as the rock, broad and general as the casing air. There's a triplet of similes here. He says broad as the marble, founded as the rock, as broad and general as the casing air. So there's a triplet of similes here. And the reason that is there to emphasize the extremes of security that Macbeth desires. He currently does not feel whole as marble, founded as rock, broad and general as the casing air. He does not feel that way because he's so scared and insecure by Fleance's escape. And so that triplet of similes is there to almost provide the opposite of how he actually feels. The imagery of marble and rock symbolizes like solidity, strength, permanence. It suggests that he's craving a kingship that feels stable, it's unshakable, something that can't be taken away from him. That's a strong foundation. Except by contrast, he wants also the casing air. And what he means by that is freedom. He wants freedom of choice. He wants freedom to rule however he likes. So he wants a rule that is stable, that he cannot lose, and also a rule that allows him freedom to rule however he likes. So, he wishes for power that is limitless and all-encompassing, except this triplet of similes is very ironic because he really has none of these. He doesn't have a strong foundation. He currently has a rule that could be quite easily taken away from him, and he's clearly not free because he's overcome by paranoia. So it's irony in the fact that these are the things that he wants that he cannot have. And so this foreshadows his downfall. He then uses, I hope you would notice, cabined, cribbed, confined. You've got 3 C's all in one go there. There's a semantic field of imprisonment here. All of these words relate to being trapped or imprisoned. Cabined, cribbed, confined, and bound. And so this conveys Macbeth's sense of entrapment. He feels trapped by his fears. Each word relates to this feeling of restriction, enclosure, a loss of freedom. And so it symbolizes how his ambition has led not to his security, but his psychological captivity. The triplet is sort of fricative. You get this sort of k sounds, the k, the b, the f. You get these fricative and plosive sounds that reinforce that claustrophobic effect. So the cabined, the cribbed, the confined, the bound, and then you also get the C's, the k, k, k. All of those are very harsh sounding syllables. And they're there to mimic this idea of the walls closing in, the feeling of enclosure and entrapment. And it creates a rhythm of tightening confinement. His mind is shrinking under paranoia. He is his own captor. And then finally, this idea of the saucy doubts. He gives doubts human qualities. He calls them saucy. And what he means by that, he doesn't mean what we mean by saucy. He doesn't mean like flirtatious. He means insolent, bold, arrogant, as if they were impertinent, mocking. They were mocking him. And so this shows Macbeth's loss of control because instead of commanding power, he's now ruled by his own emotions. He can't control how he feels, and they're beginning to take over his life. So that personification really solidifies that. Okay. Now, after he finds out that Fleance is dead, and okay, he's a little bit concerned, but his main concern is, but Banquo's safe? What he really means by that is, that Banquo is dead, right? That's a really interesting response, considering that he finds out that Fleance escaped, and his main priority is, but you did kill Banquo, right? So Macbeth repeats this question that he asked before, showing that he feels paranoid and guilty. You know, Fleance's escape makes him doubt Banquo's death. He needs to make sure that Banquo has actually been killed, because Banquo is a big threat to him. So, thinking about the context of these 2 quotes, He should have gained by now. Tragic hero. This whole scene is about him as a tragic hero. It's about him falling. Macbeth is beginning to fall from grace to a point of no return. He is in his peripeteia right now. There's a reversal of fortune happening right now in this very scene. And his mind is slipping. He's beginning to be tormented by his own thoughts, his own emotions, his own fears, to a point where it's uncontrollable. And that's what I mean by peripeteia, is he's becoming all consumed by his own mind that he cannot control himself or his own thoughts. Imagine nowadays, a good example to compare to this would be this idea of depression. Someone who's depressed might be stuck in a cycle of bad habits and bad thoughts about themselves. This is what Macbeth's experiencing right now. He's stuck. He cannot get out of this bad place. And then also the Holinshed Chronicles. Shakespeare, in the original Holinshed Chronicles, Banquo is presented as villainous. He helps Macbeth do villainous acts. But in Shakespeare's version of the play, Banquo is actually changed to be a very nice character. And the reason for that, if you remember back, is because it creates him as almost opposite to Macbeth. Banquo is the ideal Jacobean man, someone the audience can relate to and aspire to now. And so his death is there to shock the audience, highlights the extent of Macbeth's sins to discourage the audience from opposing God and the king. Banquo is there to be this authority figure. He's there to be someone that the audience want to be. And so by having him be opposite to Macbeth, it emphasizes Macbeth's bad deeds, shows you how really bad they are. So it would have scared them into obedience to break the great chain. Let me quickly read the chat. So Macbeth is technically the protagonist of this play because he is the main character. That doesn't necessarily make him a good character, but he is our main character. Wouldn't it be obvious if the murderer comes with blood? You would think so, but none of the nobles notice. That's just the way Shakespeare wrote it. I agree with you. I think if someone came to my dinner with blood on their face, I would notice. Not the rest of the nobles, apparently. Okay, would it be helpful to read the original story? If you wanted to, I've summarized it for you, the three main differences in the context stuff that I've been through. I would save yourself the time because I don't think it would be the most helpful activity. Okay, a little bit more context. Because Banquo is extremely important in this scene. Linking back to this Holinshed Chronicles change, one of the reasons that Shakespeare makes this change is because James I believed he was related to Banquo, the real Banquo in real life. And so Shakespeare changes the original story to present Banquo as being noble and virtuous and morally upright, very much in contrast to Macbeth, who is murderous. Now, the audience would very much admire Banquo, not just because he's the ideal citizen, but because they would know that James I is supposedly related to Banquo. And so they would condemn Macbeth even further because he was opposite to Banquo. And therefore, that's going to reinforce James's legitimacy and divine right to the throne. The effect on the reader or the audience would be that they would feel hope and reassurance upon Fleance's survival. To find out that Fleance escapes would make them feel quite good and hopeful. And it would signal that God's order and rightful succession cannot be destroyed, no matter how violent or ambitious Macbeth is. But they would also feel sort of tense and suspenseful, not knowing what was going to happen to Fleance in the future. So you've got that sort of contrast there. But it's important to note the contrast of why Banquo has been made into a noble and likable character, because it highlights that contrast to Macbeth. Okay. Now, Banquo's ghost appears before Macbeth. And Macbeth's response to this is, which of you have done this? Thou canst not say I did it. Never shake thy gory locks at me. Now, in context, the ghost is sat in Macbeth's place at the table. No one else can see this ghost, only Macbeth. So he starts to verbally respond to the ghost, and everyone else is kind of looking around, going, "What's this guy talking about? Like, who's this guy speaking to?" And Macbeth's giving it all of this, and yeah, and it's confusing and disorientating all of the guests. Um, Now he says directly to the guests, "Which of you have done this?" Thinking someone's playing a joke on him. This rhetorical question shows Macbeth's paranoia because he feels vulnerable. He feels like his position as king could quite easily be taken away from him. So it shows us his guilt as a character because he's projecting onto other people. His conscience is pretty much fractured beyond repair, and Banquo is sat in his chair, which symbolizes how the ghost has invaded Macbeth's authority and consumed his mind. So that is an important thing that you could include in an essay. Is not only is the ghost important because of what it says and because of what it does, but it's sat in Macbeth's chair, which is physically symbolic. Thou canst not say I did it. Now, for those of you who don't know, apostrophe is a technique where an actor or a character talks to an inanimate object, something that's not human. And I'm including this in this scene because technically the ghost is not real. It's not a real thing. It's a hallucination. It's an apparition. It's not human, really. And so you could count it as apostrophe. He's talking to something that's not really there. Macbeth directly addresses this ghost as if it were real. He can't distinguish between hallucination and reality. That very much should remind you of the dagger in Act 2, Scene 2. This highlights, therefore, his psychological instability, stemming from his guilt. The words of canst, which means can't, shows how he's trying to frantically regain control and deflect that responsibility once again. He's trying to deflect the guilt in order to overcome it. So that's kind of like what he's shouting at this ghost. He says, never shake thy gory locks at me. Notice there you've got that imperative verb. Never shake the gory locks at me. He's trying to control the ghost because he himself does not feel in control. And so he's trying to project onto others to try and gain control. He's trying to use a forceful command to get the ghost to obey him. And this is ironic because the guests can't see the ghost, so Macbeth's attempt actually makes him look a bit crazy because he's shouting at something that is not there. And then finally, you get the gory locks, which is quite a grotesque image, really, because what the gory locks means is a bloody head. What he's seeing is Banquo's head covered in blood. And so it's quite a grotesque piece of imagery, which symbolizes the guilt that he feels from the violent act of murder. He's haunted at this current moment in time. Okay. Now, we're not going to go through the AO2 of this quote, but it's important to note here Macbeth is shouting at a ghost in front of all the other guests. This is not a private conversation. This is happening in front of every other noble person in the room. They can all see him do this. They're all witnessing this. Macbeth shouting into thin air. This is not a secret. This is happening in front of everyone. What he's asking the ghost is he's trying to tell it to take another form. So he says, "What man dare, I dare. Approach thou like the rugged Russian bear, the armed rhinoceros, or the Hyrcan tiger. Take any shape but that, and my firm nerves shall never tremble. Or to be alive again, and dare me to the desert with thy sword. If trembling I inhabit then, protest me the baby of a girl. Hence horrible shadow, unreal mockery hence." And what he's really saying there is, take another form, and I will not be afraid of you. I'm only scared of you because you look like Banquo. You could be a tiger, you could be a bear, you could bite me with a sword, and I would not be scared of you. And if I was scared of you, you're allowed to call me a little girl, basically, is what he's saying. So, what does Lady Macbeth try to do? She tries to calm the guests. She has to try and regain control somehow. I'm not going to focus too much on Lady Macbeth today because we want to focus on the character of Macbeth, but she tries to actively diffuse the situation. She says, "Sit, worthy friends. My lord is often thus, and have been from his youth. Pray you keep seat. The fit is momentary upon thought. He will be again well." Now, what she's saying there is, sit down, it's cool. Like, he's been afflicted by this problem ever since he was a young kid. It'll go away momentarily. Not a problem. Please sit down. So what she tries to do is reassure the guests by claiming that Macbeth is psychologically ill. She's telling the guests that he has a physical illness that takes over his mind, but it goes away after a few minutes. So I've highlighted here themes of deception and appearance versus reality because she's lying to the guests to try and control them, to try and manipulate them, lying about a fake illness that Macbeth does not have. Now, she takes Macbeth aside to have a private conversation, and what she says to him is, "Are you a man? This is the very painting of your fear. This is the air-drawn dagger. These flaws and starts, impostors of true fear, would well become a woman's story at a winter's fire." Now, one thing we know about Lady Macbeth is that she loves to manipulate by preying on gender stereotypes. She tries to emasculate Macbeth, and she has done throughout the entire play up until this point, and it's worked. So she tries it again. She says, "Are you a man?" She uses that rhetorical question, the exact same question that she uses in Act 1, Scene 7. She uses a reoccurring tactic to try and manipulate Macbeth, to try and take control. She uses this metaphor of the painting of the fear. She describes his fear as being painting, which suggests that Banquo's ghost is not real. She's saying to him, like, fear is artwork, and the artist is the person who feels the fear. You can control the artwork in the same way that you can control your own fear. It's not real, it's a projection of your imagination. And similarly, she alludes back to the air-drawn dagger. She says, "Do you not remember the hallucination that you had when you killed Duncan? You knew that was a hallucination. We got past that. So you can also get past this." The dagger at the time symbolized the fact that he was haunted by his guilt and ambition. And so the ghost, much like the dagger, is a product of his fractured mind. And Lady Macbeth is trying to get him to understand that. Now, she also uses a triplet. She says flaws, starts, imposters, all within this sort of semantic field of fakes and counterfeits. And she does this to emphasize that Macbeth's fears descend from his own mind. If you want to get deeper with the language analysis, there is some sibilant consonants in there. So the flaws, the starts, the imposters, so that sort of S sound comes up quite in those three words. She's trying to calm him, to reassure him, telling him that his panic attack is actually just from his own imagination. So she's trying to reassure him that it's fake and calm him. And then finally, she says, she links back to this gender stereotype behavior and says that she reduces his vision of the ghost to being a campside fairy tale, something that women tell around this campfire and scare themselves. She's trying to diminish how he feels by saying, "You're basically a woman. Like, you're getting scared like a little girl telling campfire stories." And so she's trying to manipulate him by doing that, through that metaphor. Except, context, I'm getting ahead of myself, gender stereotypes. Lady Macbeth repeatedly challenges traditional gender roles, equating manhood with ruthlessness and ambition. In Jacobean society, men were expected to be decisive and strong. Women were seen as emotional, submissive, and domestic. Here she weaponizes these stereotypes to shame Macbeth, implying weakness and lack of courage. Shakespeare engages with gender expectations while subverting them. Lady Macbeth is dominant, manipulative, and strategic, challenging typical roles on stage. And then also the tragic hero comes back again. We see his psychological vulnerability and mental collapse come into play. Okay, except we know throughout the play, shaming his masculinity has worked up until this point. Fair play to Lady Macbeth. It's worked until this point. But this is the first time that this does not work because he speaks right back to her. He says, I am a bold one that dare look on that which might appall the devil. He fights back. He's showing that playing on his masculinity does not work anymore. His quick remark shows that he actually reaffirms his own sense of masculinity. He's not going to be manipulated by Lady Macbeth anymore. He no longer needs her or allows himself to be manipulated. And this is it's a very big change compared to Act 1 and even Act 2. Okay. Now, even after all of this, his main concern here is how sayest thou that Macduff denies his person at our great bidding? And what he means by that is, what do you think about the fact that Macduff has refused to come to this dinner? Now, if you remember back, those of you who were with me last year, we ended talking about Act 1 and Act 3, Scene 1, Act 3, Scene 2, where Macduff runs away. He flees to England. And so he doesn't tell anyone about it. He just doesn't turn up to this dinner that he was invited to. And Macbeth has suddenly realized, after all of this commotion with Ghost, he's suddenly realized, oh, Macduff's not here. And so he asks Lady Macbeth what she thinks about it. And so he focuses on Macduff. He's not stupid, but he is suspicious that Macduff has not turned up. And so you get this rhetorical question, which conveys his shock and his frustration and his growing paranoia. Except his tone here and his diction is much more elevated, it's much more controlled, reflecting his sense of royal authority. He feels, for the first time, entitled to the throne, and he almost sees himself as a monarch who should be obeyed. So anyone who hasn't come to this dinner should be shamed. And the irony here is that Macbeth is so blind by his narcissistic belief that his authority should be without question that he cannot fathom Macduff's refusal. He is suspicious that Macduff hasn't showed, but he doesn't know exactly why he's not here. So obviously that's going to create tension because the audience, through dramatic irony, know the reason. We know that he's fled to England. And so we start to see Macbeth descend into madness because he doesn't know something that we know. Okay, now, coming towards the end of Act 3, Scene 4 then, there are some very pivotal quotes, some very famous ones that you will have heard of before. The first one is that blood will have blood. Now, what does Macbeth mean by this? He's saying that committing a violent deed will lead to further violent deeds. In order to protect yourself, you need to do more damage. So he's entered into a cycle of violence. So we see this sort of repeating motif of blood, and we see this throughout the play. The bloody dagger, the bloody head, the apparitions that come in Act 4. We see this repeating symbol of the blood. We reoccur throughout the play. And each time it symbolizes violence. But not only violence, Macbeth's guilt, how he feels about committing the violent acts that he does. So it shows Macbeth's growing guilt and the pressure that he feels. We get a repetition of blood. It's not just the symbol, it's the repetition of it, along with the plosive consonants, this B and the D sound, the blood. And it presents the idea that this violence is almost unavoidable. It's overcoming his mind because it's so harsh. So Macbeth's guilt is inescapable. It's forever overpowering his mind. You also get this idea of the will. He doesn't say blood could have blood or blood might have blood. He says blood will have blood. This very assured verb emphasizes how Macbeth is consumed by a cycle of guilt and violence. He believes very solidly that you must commit violent acts to cover your previous violent acts. One murder inevitably leads to another murder. So he believes that guilt is inescapable. and he feels it. The blood on Macbeth's hands will demand retribution, whether from God or whether from other humans. And so this foreshadows the later killings that he will continue to do, particularly the decision to kill Macduff's family and secure the throne. The blood will have blood is such a vital quote in the play because it shows exactly what I'm talking about. This is his peripeteia. This is the moment where things cannot be reversed. And he's beginning to believe that too. He believes that violence will lead to more violence. He cannot go back anymore. He can only continue going forward and doing violent things. Violence is overcoming his mind, it's becoming him. He's consumed by violence and guilt. He also says, I am in blood stepped so far. Should I wade no more, returning were as tedious a go over. And what he means by that is, I have waded so far into this river of blood that even if I stopped now, it would be as unpleasant to go back as to go forward. And so again, this is showing that peripeteia. He believes that he cannot go back. This is solidifying him as a tragic hero. He's in his fall and he's continuing to fall and he's committing to that fall. So what can we pick out of this? Firstly, you've got the hyperbolic extended metaphor. He's stepped in blood. He compares blood to being a river. This highlights how deeply involved he is in the violence. He feels like he's having to wade through water. I don't know if any of you have been swimming before, or in the sea, or in some sort of like river. It's harder to walk through than if you were just walking through air. That's how he feels. He's having to force himself through by committing further murders. The imagery suggests that his retreat is almost impossible. He'd rather continue going forward than try and go back. The idea of the so far, this exaggeration, this hyperbole, he's almost trying to reassure himself that there is no option to go back. He's exaggerating the idea that stopping now, stopping murdering people, would be just as difficult as continuing to murder people. So this emphasizes his sense of inevitability, the entrapment that he feels. He feels that having committed murder, continuing down the same path is easier than returning to morality. The imagery, the reoccurring motif of the blood again. I'm in blood stepped so far. That shows not only physically how many murders he's done, but the fact that he feels really guilty about doing these murders. It's a symbol of guilt, violence, and moral corruption. The sense of him wading through the blood evokes physical struggle, psychological weight. It's not just like walking through air, he's struggling to pull himself through. He feels trapped, his conscience is fractured. And then finally, the idea of the tedious a go-over. You get this fricative language, the T and the V sounds, mimics how tedious and how high effort he imagines turning back to be, therefore emphasizing his struggle back to morality, the lack of control that he faces when he thinks about violence. His ambitions are still strong enough to justify not seeking redemption. And I want to make a point here after these contextual pieces of information. So think about the context before I go into my point. Firstly, we could link this to the Holinshed Chronicles again. Shakespeare changes the character of Macbeth. In the original story, Macbeth is quite a nice king for quite a long time. But in Shakespeare's version of the story, he falls from grace and becomes evil quite quickly on in the play. And he does a lot of murderous things very quickly in the grand scheme of things. And Shakespeare humanizes Macbeth. He shows psychological torment, moral conflict. Macbeth is aware of the consequences of his violent acts, but he's trapped within this cycle of murder and guilt, which adds depth to his character, therefore emphasizing the moral message, which is don't play with fire, otherwise you're going to get burnt. Don't tempt the gods, because the gods will trap you and smite you for the rest of eternity. Tragic hero. The fact that he believes he's so far into violence that he can't turn back. This is the peak of his peripeteia. He is at a point of no return. It presents the inevitability of the consequences that of his actions caused by his hamartia of unchecked ambition. Macbeth recognizes his moral decline, but cannot stop it. This line evokes pathos as the audience sees him suffering from guilt and despair, even whilst committing further atrocities. Now, pathos means feel sympathy for somebody. It comes from a Greek term. So we still feel guilt, we still feel sympathy for him and empathy, even though he's done these murderous acts, because we can see how much he's suffering. Okay, the linking back to the great chain of being and the divine right of kings. His initial killing of Duncan was a break in the great chain of being. The cycle of violence that he's in reflects this cosmic imbalance. The universe demands justice, and murder begets murder to restore order. Macbeth is experiencing the consequences of violating the natural order by killing Duncan and Banquo. He recognizes he cannot undo the chaos he has caused, reinforcing that moral and cosmic order are both intertwined. And this reinforces the moral message of the play. And then finally, returning what is tedious a go-over. Macbeth is choosing to exercise free will here. He recognizes that continuing the murder is his choice, yet he feels trapped by previous actions. He has no choice to stop, but choose. He has a choice to stop, but chooses not to. And that's important for those of you who have been with me since last year. I keep mentioning this fate versus free will. This is another point to add to our debate. This is not fate here. This is free will. He is choosing out of his own volition to continue murdering people. This is his choice. He could very easily turn back and turn himself in, but he's not going to. He wants to continue murdering people, and that's his choice. Okay, now the point that I wanted to make very quickly before we finish is that Macbeth never seeks forgiveness. I want to make that very clear now. Never once in this play does he seek forgiveness. And that's contextually important because at the time, the country was very Christian. It was believed that if you just confessed for your sins, you'd be washed away of your sins, you'd be forgiven, and you'd be able to get into heaven. So it's strange that Macbeth never seeks forgiveness. He never once admits to doing anything wrong, even though he clearly knows that he has done wrong. And this highlights his moral and spiritual corruption. He's so encapsulated within violence, in a cycle of violence and murder, that he doesn't even consider forgiveness. It's not even an option to him. He's so corrupt and so tyrannous that, it's not an option. So the very final thing he says in this scene is, I will to the weird sisters, more shall they speak. He chooses to go and consult the witches for answers, which is important because, as we will consider in Act 4, Scene 1 next time, they're going to show him some really funky apparitions. So, contextually, why is it important that he's gone to seek the witches? Well, his decision foreshadows his increasing reliance on supernatural guidance. This is his peripeteia, is a turning point, as he moves from acting on immediate threats, murdering people, to seeking prophecies. He goes back to the witches for answers. He willingly embraces darkness and evil. Before this, the witches were just prophesizers. They were there to push along the plot. They were there to spur his ambition. But now they are an active part of this plot. He is embracing darkness and evil by going back to them. It shows us that he is a tyrannous person. He's corrupt. Earlier in the play, Macbeth's actions are prompted by external influences, so the witch's prophecies, Lady Macbeth's manipulation. But by choosing to seek the witches himself, he takes control of his own fate, showing growing decisiveness and moral deterioration. And then finally, we can also link it to this idea that Macbeth is increasingly obsessed with certainty for his power and future. It shows us his paranoia as a tragic hero. After seeing Macbeth Banquo's ghost, he cannot trust his own ability to secure the throne without supernatural guidance. And this decision sets the stage for the next phase of his tragic downfall, the murder of Macduff's family and the overreach that eventually leads to his demise. So, to sum up, what do we learn about Macbeth? Let's look at our AO1 for Act 3, Scene 4. Well, we know that he is psychologically unraveling. That should be very clear to you by now. He's overcome by guilt for killing his friend. He's haunted by fear. His fear is no longer about being caught, but about being overthrown and punished by God. He is isolated. He has lost moral control, becoming a tyrant. He is committed to a path of blood. He feels trapped in a cycle of violence. And he is turning away from his wife towards the supernatural. So, how are we supposed to feel about him then as an audience member? Well, three things come to my mind. These might change for you, but I feel a little bit uneasy for him. His obsession with Banquo's ghosts tells me he's losing control, foreshadowing more violence. And so I feel a bit uneasy as an audience member. I'm scared for what's going to come next. But I also condemn him because he's doing violent things and he had a chance to seek forgiveness but didn't. So I condemn him for that. But then also there is this other side where maybe you pity him a little bit. You feel a little bit bad for him because he is suffering at the end of the day. He might be doing tyrannous, terrible things, but he's still suffering for it. He's uncontrollably as well. His guilt and torment make him seem trapped in his own ambition. Therefore, you do feel sympathy for him as a human more than anything else. And then, very finally, then, what was the purpose of this scene? Well, it reveals Macbeth in a torment. It shows the collapse of his kingship. It signals an increased dependence on the supernatural, and it marks, most importantly, his peripeteia. And I would hope that is the one thing you take away from today, is this is his reversal of fortune. He is tormented by guilt. Right, so that is it from me. I will stay around for a few minutes to look at the chat, but otherwise you are well free to go. And I'm going to finish Macbeth. I'm going to do Act 4, Act 5, hopefully one session each. Actually, I'm going to force myself to do it in one session each, and then we're going to move on to an Inspector Calls. So yeah, anyone got any questions? Is Macbeth mentally unstable? Very much so. Yes, absolutely he is. He's torn by guilt. He's so overcome by violence and the need to do violent things that he can't control himself anymore. I mean, you saw he was literally speaking to ghosts that weren't real. In Act 2, he was speaking to a floating dagger. If that doesn't tell you what you need to know, I don't know what will. Can I do some revision for paper one English? Yes, I am going to do English language at some point, probably after an inspector calls. So we're done. If the person who asked what time this finishes. Will we need to know about Lady Macbeth as well? She's one of the two characters that could absolutely come up in as a question, but not to as big a capacity as Macbeth. So, what is peripeteia? Peripeteia is contextually, Macbeth is what we call a tragic hero. And all that means is that he's someone that started really likable, someone really nice, someone really noble, and he's fallen to a place of, as you just saw, moral collapse, unstable mentality. And the peripeteia is the moment in the play where things become irreversible. It's a point in the play where he can't go back. So as you just saw here, this moment is the peripeteia. It's a moment where things are sealed for him. He can no longer seek forgiveness. He can no longer choose to go back and undo his acts. He's sticking with it and he's going to continue murdering people. That's what I mean by peripeteia. I haven't got my story from before summer. I forgot to chase that up with Mr. Siddiqui. Remind me, I will do. I was never given your story, so I don't know where that is, unfortunately. The Macbeth essay I've marked. I just need to get everything sent back. Paranoia is where you're overcome by fear of something. So if you're paranoid about something, um, you're scared of something happening to the extent where it basically takes over your life, where every thought you're having is um, about this fear. Where can you revise this? I'll give you a few good resources. Physics and Maths Tutor is a really good place to revise Macbeth. It has all the sort of contextual points that you need. It has key quotes analyzed and summarized for you. It's a really good thing. So Physics and Maths Tutor, or PMT. It's a really good place to get this. Cool. If there's no other questions, you're free to go. Thank you again for coming. I hope this is helpful, but otherwise, have a nice week and I'll see you next week.